think when the term awakening is used, maybe some people feel a little insulted, like, oh, I'm awake, I know things, and I keep up on, current events, and there may be some resistance, and I think it's important to define awakening a little more clearly. So how do we wake up when we live in such an overstimulating modern world? Well, one of the obvious answers to that is mindful use of technology. I think right now, because there's so much trauma that hasn't been processed in humanity, a lot of people are unconsciously utilizing technology, or rather being utilized in a way by technology. It's a very powerful force, not to be underestimated. So I'd like to share some tools that are helpful in terms of protecting your senses. And the first one is an app that is freely available. It's called Screen Zen. I think there's probably different apps with different names that do a similar task, but this one, I've been using it for a while, and it basically gives you a little pause and a fun question before you open any app. Noise canceling headphones, and also earplugs, which are very cheap if you lose them in crowded public places. I find that I can still hear everything. And blackout curtains for when you're sleeping at night can be very helpful as well. And just low sensory spaces. A very important foundation for spiritual awakening is to develop a relationship with the land that you're on. And I truly mean that in every sense of that word. I think that the beings that surround us miss the humans that interacted with them. In a way, I think sometimes of the birds and how generations of them have not heard the music and sounds of humans that tended to the forests of Turtle Island, and the indigenous people that cared for these spaces. And so we may not be indigenous to the places that we're living currently, but we are all indigenous to this earth. And so we need to cultivate a reconnection to Mother Earth in a way that is with respect to the people of this land and also of our own ancestry. And that can be a complicated process due to, the forces of the global diaspora, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I think just in terms of my journey with farming and reconnecting to my roots during the pandemic, I think it's really crucial to have a holistic nurturance of our bodies before any kind of big awakening work, because we need to prepare our bodies and minds for destruction in a way, because we're destroying old paradigms that have been embedded in our body, mind, and spirit. I wanted to read this quote by Adyashanti. It's very well known. Enlightenment is a destructive process. It has nothing to do with becoming better or being happier. Enlightenment is the crumbling away of untruth. It's seeing through the facade of pretense. It's the complete eradication of everything we imagined to be true. And so there is a preparation, for this process, and then there is the destruction of the ego. And then it's like an ongoing process, but there is a recalibration process as well, as we need to integrate what we've learned and what we're learning into our systems. And so it's a holistic process, and this can be difficult and very fragmentary in the modern world, especially if we're disconnected from our people, our cultural roots, the indigenous tribal systems of healing that we all used to have access to. Please make sure to like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's also critical that we have some forms of spiritual protection. And I've kind of struggled with this aspect a bit myself, because I think I equated it with materialism for a while, and kind of the more new age spirituality, just like buying a lot of crystals and candles and stuff. But I think that it is very valid, because basically I'm sensing this need for spiritual protection, partly because of the fear-based projections of the ego of the awakening process. So if you think about the ego as only seeing the world through its own perspective, having to let go of control and expand its awareness and become part of something greater, that's a very it can be a very delicate process. And so having things, jewelry, altars, whatever calls to you for spiritual protection, whether it's a physical thing or certain mantras, and maybe places that you go and rituals that you engage in, all can be protection. And we need to not obsess over it, but use it in a mindful way to encourage our spiritual growth. I'm seeing a lot of overlap in the spiritual community with neurodivergence, and just different forms of divergence as well, like gender divergence. And I think that it's really critical for people that can navigate different binaries to protect their systems from light, wearing sunglasses, protecting yourself from overly bright environments, especially with artificial lighting, and then also noise. There's so much traffic noise, so much overstimulation in the city, just really like loud, unnecessary noises from leaf blowers and lawn mowers and things. As humanity wakes up to not using as many fossil fuels as well, and hopefully having less noisy equipment. And also media. I think that's the big one, right? Is not listening and watching gory and angry and sexually explicit TV shows and podcasts, whatever, just like engaging in more reflective and calming practices. I want to share some information that's available on my website, including a free spiritual awakening guide that's also available at the link below this video, as well as some additional resources, including book recommendations on somatic therapy, ancestral healing, and spiritual awakening. You can also shop for some journals that I created directly on Etsy, as well as a poetry book that I wrote directly on Amazon that's available in Kindle and paperback formats. And you can also book a free 15-minute consultation with me. I offer somatic therapy, ancestral healing, and spiritual awakening services. And you can choose to combine any and all of these pathways because they are interconnected. I'm trying to be careful not to place like a judgment on, less conscious activities, because I think there is also a benefit in terms of, even if these are very toxic environments, they do push people to wake up, and perhaps even faster because there's more dire consequences. It's just that I personally don't feel the need to, and even the capacity to be in spaces that are overstimulating and overwhelming anymore. And it's interesting to see the reflection of that in modern society. I think there's also this kind of confusion or like people are not, they don't know which direction to go except to just keep going. That's kind of the energy that I'm sensing. And I think it's because people have been so disconnected from their roots and their purpose in this lifetime by a lot of these systems, by colonization, by capitalism, by patriarchy, etc. And it's not a coincidence, this is engineered for certain people to have quote unquote power in our society. So I think it's a little hard to narrowly define sensitivity, but I like the term highly sensitive person by Dr. Elaine Aron. She did a lot of research on this in the 90s and wrote a book about it. And when I first discovered this term, I didn't realize that so many people struggled with their sensitivity in a very overstimulating world. And then that's when I discovered my neurodivergence and other ways that I was quote unquote different. And then I realized the systems that define us as different are really part of the problem, and that is the lack of relationality within colonial frameworks, I guess you could say, and the need to taxonomize everything and control everything rather than just doing it for scientific purposes or greater understanding, right? Which I think is a valid use of taxonomy. I've been listening to Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and he talks about the dawn and sunset of a human's life, and I've been connecting that with the idea of preparation that I just mentioned. Preparation, destruction, and recalibration or rebirth in the awakening process, because I think that this is what we're here for, is to become our true selves and become more aware of our capabilities and our possibilities as beings that are part of the collective that's waking up to itself. So yeah, I think that there's unfortunately, such an amnesia of who we are, and there's such a fear, and we're bogged down by survival in terms of, working our whole lives to sort of like prove to ourselves our worthiness, or prove to others our worthiness, and produce children in order to make our parents happy and things like that. That's, entrenched in humanity at this point. But I hope for a more flourishing future where we can embody a more conscious way of living and enjoying all the things in life that we deserve to enjoy beyond the constricted, confines of what we deem, worthy, and something that Jung also described was kind of the petulance of like elderly people sometimes that, kind of realize this too late, that this is not what life is for as they, re-enter the spirit realm, is that, I'm just so grateful that I had this opportunity to wake up earlier in my life rather than later. But it does take work to heal and to integrate, and it takes consciousness and trusting in that process. noticed today as I left the city to come out here and enjoy hiking in the woods, there was kind of this shedding of just icky energy from my body, and I felt more and more relaxed as I walked through the forest. And there's actually a Japanese term for this. It's called Shinrin-yoku, which translates to forest bathing. And there's been scientific evidence for this now, that it helps our nervous systems, helps our bodies to be out here. And I don't think this part has been studied, but I know that I'm around other conscious beings and I'm enjoying their presence. And that's part of the healing, is that hopefully they're, enjoying my presence too. And it's reciprocal. But I think that it's about reclaiming our relationship with our sensitivity, which, out in this quiet environment, bathed in, trees and plants, I don't feel overstimulated at all. I feel very normal in terms of my sensitivity. So I think that's really an important consideration, is what environments are you in? Are they conducive to awakening, and having some critical thinking about why that might be, why we are always pushed to be beyond our limits, pushed into these, tragically overwhelming environments. Something else to be aware of is the cyclical nature of this process. And like I mentioned, the preparation, destruction, and recalibration process, our awakening, healing, integration, happens throughout life. And so we get to actually choose what pace at which we want to take on this process. And I think it's really important, because in a society that operates at such a quick and relentless pace, there's very little space to be present. And so it doesn't allow room for making mistakes and learning from them. And again, that relationality takes a certain amount of presence, right? A certain amount of ability to connect. And what I see a lot is just the franticness of people rushing around and speaking quickly and doing things at breakneck pace is just really serving someone else, right? It's not serving you to be running around at 1,000 miles an hour. So this is a pace that I've had to recalibrate myself to in order to reclaim my power. I think when the term awakening is used, maybe some people feel a little insulted, like, oh, I'm awake, I know things, and I'm, I keep up on current events, and there may be some resistance. And I think it's important to define awakening a little more clearly in terms of opening up your senses to the experience of life to the fullest. So that could include, your physical senses, the five skandhas, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and your consciousness, and also fine-tuning your senses to a healthy degree. And that's what integration is not to, always be in your mental formations, or always be only thinking about your form or feeling sensations in your body, but being able to navigate those with precision and with discernment. And staying grounded is always the number one priority for me in an overstimulating world.